Welcome back everyone. Today, we're continuing with the next part of this series, called What If Goku Remembered the Saiyans? My name is Ash. Please, for me, drop a like and subscribe to the page. Also leave your comments down below. With that, let's begin. Kakarot sat cross-legged on the rocky terrain of Yardrat, his eyes closed and his breathing steady. The stillness around him was broken only by the occasional whistle of the wind. It had been nearly a year since his battle against Frieza, a fight that had pushed him to awaken the power of the legendary Super Saiyan. But with that power came an unsettling lack of control. For months, the mere thought of Frieza's cruelty was enough to trigger the transformation. Now, after relentless meditation and training, Kakarot was closer than ever to mastering his newfound abilities. As his mind focused, he felt the familiar surge of energy bubbling beneath the surface, a wild force demanding release. Slowly he stood, his movements deliberate and calculated, his fists clenched tightly by his sides as he honed in on the energy within. The ground beneath him trembled as gusts of wind swirled in every direction, whipping his orange gi and untamed hair. His black locks flickered, glowing golden for brief moments before reverting. Then, with one final push, his hair and eyebrows turned a radiant gold, and his dark eyes shifted to an intense teal. The transformation was complete. Kakarot lowered his arms and exhaled deeply. His surroundings were intact, untouched by the violent energy that had once caused so much destruction whenever he powered up. A faint smile crossed his face. Finally, he muttered to himself, the golden aura dimming slightly but still present. He gazed out at the horizon, where the twin suns of Yardrat were beginning to set. His thoughts turned to Earth, to his wife and son. He missed them deeply, but his determination to protect them outweighed his longing. This was why he had stayed away, to ensure he could control this overwhelming power. Yeah, he murmured with resolve. Walking toward his spaceship, it's time to go home. As the ship's hatch opened with a soft hiss, Kakarot took one last look at the barren yet peaceful planet that had been his training ground. He stepped inside, thoughts of home filling his mind as the door sealed shut behind him. Bardock's training. Inside a high-tech gravity room on Earth, Bardock leaped through the air, sweat dripping from his forehead as he dodged and countered invisible attacks. Each punch and kick he threw carried the weight of someone determined to grow stronger. The gravity in the chamber was set to 150 times Earth's normal pull, a level most would find unbearable. For Bardock, it was a challenge he welcomed. He landed with a thud, the metallic floor groaning under the force of his landing. Without hesitation, he sprang back into action, his movements swift and precise. The chamber's artificial gravity pushed against him, testing his every move. "Come on, old man," Bardock grunted, imagining his father standing in front of him. "I'll show you I'm not a kid anymore." But as much as he tried to focus on his training, there was an ache in his heart. He missed his father, Kakarot. Sparring against empty air just wasn't the same. He needed a real opponent, someone to push him to his limits. Bardock paused, catching his breath. His tail swished lazily behind him as he looked around the room. The advanced equipment was a gift from his mother, Bulma, for his last birthday. She had designed it to exceed the capabilities of any other gravity chamber, but she had sworn him to secrecy about its true limit. Not a word to anyone about it going over 100 times gravity, she had warned. "I don't need a bunch of Saiyans pestering me to build them one." He smirked at the memory, but his smile faded as the emptiness of the room reminded him again of his father's absence. Bardock let out a long sigh and deactivated the gravity controls. The oppressive weight lifted, and he stretched his arms above his head. Raditz, his uncle, had been busy training with Nappa most of the time. The two full-blooded Saiyans had grown closer recently, leaving Bardock with fewer chances to spar with them. Vegeta? Well, Vegeta was Vegeta. Bardock rolled his eyes at the thought of the prince. "At least Mom lets me train," he muttered, stepping out of the chamber. He grabbed a towel and wiped the sweat from his face. After they'd returned from Namek, his mother had insisted he balance training with education. Bardock still shuddered at the memory of her ultimatum: study at home or go to school. "No way was I going to school," he said to himself, chuckling. Instead, he'd agreed to complete his schoolwork at home. It wasn't too bad. Most days, he could finish it in a few hours and still have time to train. After experiencing the terror of Frieza firsthand, Bardock had vowed to become stronger. He didn't know what other threats might be out there, but he wasn't going to be caught unprepared. He stepped outside, feeling the crisp air against his skin. Looking up at the sky, he clenched his fist. "Dad, wherever you are, you'd better be ready," he said, determination gleaming in his eyes. "When you get back, I'll be strong enough to take you on." Bardock froze mid-strike as a wave of energy pulsed through him, making every hair on his body stand on end. The raw, immense power heading toward Earth was unmistakable and terrifying. It wasn't his father. The energy felt dark, almost suffocating, but it carried an unsettling familiarity. His mind raced to connect the dots. Then it hit him like a punch to the gut. "Frieza?" he muttered under his breath, his voice trembling slightly. No, that couldn't be. Frieza was dead. He had seen it with his own eyes. Shaking off his shock, Bardock quickly refocused. "Gravity off," he barked. The room responded instantly, returning to normal conditions. Without hesitation, Bardock blasted through the gravity chamber's doors, the air around him crackling as he shot into the sky. The wind roared past his ears as he flew toward the source of the power. He pushed himself faster, the uneasy feeling gnawing at his stomach. If this energy was anything like Frieza's, then Earth was in grave danger. Before long, he noticed two figures closing in on him. Raditz and Nappa quickly caught up, their determined expressions matching the gravity of the situation. "You know Mom's gonna kill you, right?" Raditz said, his tone dry but laced with concern. "Rushing off to fight something like this on your own? Not your smartest move, kid." Bardock smirked, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his nerves. "Well, that's why I let you two come along. You're my backup plan." "Backup plan, huh?" Nappa chuckled, his deep voice carrying a mix of pride and excitement. "Good to know we're still useful." Bardock slowed his flight, letting the older warriors close the distance. Despite the banter, all three knew this wasn't a time for jokes. The ominous power was growing stronger by the second, and whatever, or whoever, was behind it, they would have to face it together. Inside another gravity chamber, Krillin was gasping for breath as he completed his 10,000th push-up. Sweat dripped off his nose, pooling on the sleek metal floor beneath him. His body ached, but he welcomed the pain. It was a constant reminder of how far he had come since the last time he died, a humiliation he vowed never to endure again. 9 months ago, he'd been wished back to life, after dying in yet another unwinnable battle. The sting of defeat and helplessness still haunted him, driving him to train harder than ever before. Every day, he pushed himself to his limits, refusing to be a liability to his friends. As he rose to his feet, Krillin's sharp senses flared, and his heart sank. An enormous power was hurtling toward Earth. His first thought was disbelief. This energy felt faintly familiar, but it was steeped in malice. "This can't be good," he muttered, grabbing a towel to wipe his face. The air in the chamber seemed heavier as dread settled in his chest. Whoever, or whatever, was coming, their intent was anything but friendly. Without wasting another second, Krillin powered up and launched himself into the sky, speeding toward the source of the disturbance. Chi-Chi stood in Yamcha's bedroom, holding a pair of pink panties between her thumb and forefinger like they were radioactive. Her face was a mask of fury, her lips pressed into a thin line. "What are these?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. Yamcha, standing awkwardly near the doorway, froze. His eyes darted to the offending garment in her hand. He cleared his throat, trying to stall for time. "They're a gift for you, of course." Chi-Chi's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Oh, really? Then why do they reek of perfume, and not mine, I might add?" She stepped closer, her voice rising with each word. "If you were going to cheat on me, the least you could do was get rid of the evidence before inviting me over." "Wait, I can explain?" Yamcha stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "Explain?" Chi-Chi scoffed, her voice dripping with venom. "There's nothing to explain. We're done, Yamcha." Before he could say another word, she spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Yamcha was left standing alone in the wreckage of his relationship. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Great, just great. In truth, he couldn't blame her. He had cheated, and now it had come back to bite him. That night with the random woman at the bar had been a mistake, a stupid, drunken mistake. But regrets wouldn't fix this now. As he stood there wallowing in self-pity, a sudden surge of energy jolted him out of his thought. His head snapped up, his senses locking on to the power heading toward Earth. "Seriously? Now?" he groaned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Couldn't this wait until after my life fell apart?" Despite his frustration, Yamcha knew he couldn't ignore the threat. With a deep breath, he powered up and took to the skies, heading straight for the source of the energy. Whatever it wasn't friendly, and he wasn't about to let Earth go undefended. Bardock, Raditz, and Nappa descended into a dense forest clearing, their boots crunching softly against the grass as they landed. The oppressive energy they had been tracking was growing stronger by the second. All three warriors felt the tension in the air, as if it were something solid pressing down on them. Raditz folded his arms and surveyed the area. "Now we wait," he said firmly. "Suppress your power levels. If they sense us, we'll lose any advantage we might have." Bardock and Nappa exchanged a brief glance before complying, their energy signatures fading into near nothingness. The oppressive weight of the approaching power wasn't lost on any of them. Bardock, fidgeting slightly, finally broke the silence. "How are we supposed to stop something like this?" he asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of his voice. "That power feels massive." Raditz's expression hardened. "We fight together," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Only weaklings fight together," came a condescending voice from above. All three warriors turned to see Vegeta descending from the sky, his arms crossed, his trademark smirk firmly in place. "Nice of you to show up, Vegeta," Bardock said dryly, his words laced with sarcasm. Raditz stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're a fool if you believe that," he said coldly. "You know as well as I do you don't stand a chance against that power alone." Vegeta's smirk twitched, but he refused to back down. "Not yet," he admitted. "But when I ascend to a Super Saiyan, I'll crush them with ease." "If you ever ascend," Nappa said with a scoff, "you're not even sure it's possible for you. What if Kakarot is the only one who can become a Super Saiyan? You might never—" "You insolent oaf," Vegeta snarled, raising a glowing hand as energy crackled in his palm. "I will ascend. I will surpass all of you." Nappa smirked and stepped forward, his massive frame squaring off with the prince. "Then prove it," he said, his voice calm but full of challenge. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Vegeta. You're strong, but you're not invincible. And you definitely haven't mastered the Kaioken." Before Vegeta could unleash his attack, a new voice cut through the tension. "Enough!" Piccolo's deep, gravelly voice silenced the argument as he stepped into view from the shadows of the forest. His arms were crossed, and his stern glare pinned both Vegeta and Nappa in place. "You two idiots want to broadcast our location? Because that's exactly what you're doing." Vegeta growled, but lowered his hand, the energy dissipating. Nappa huffed and took a step back, though his smirk remained. "Fine," Vegeta muttered. "But when this is over, we're settling this." "Whatever you say, Prince," Nappa replied, rolling his eyes. Piccolo ignored the exchange and turned his attention to the horizon. His antennae twitched slightly as he focused on the approaching powers. "There's more than one," he said grimly. Bardock frowned. "More than one? What do you mean?" Piccolo nodded. "Two distinct powers," he clarified, "and they're both significant. But that's not all. It feels like they brought an army with them." Raditz cursed under his breath. "An army? Great. Just what we needed." Before anyone could respond, Krillin landed in the clearing, his orange GI slightly scuffed from his rapid flight. "Nice of you to join us," Raditz said, his tone dry but tinged with respect. Krillin offered a small smile. "Figured you could use some backup." Raditz gave him a once-over and nodded approvingly. "You've gotten stronger," he admitted. "I've been training like crazy," Krillin replied. "After what happened on Namek, I can't let myself be weak again." "Yeah, it shows," came Tien's voice, as he and Yamcha landed nearby. Yamcha rubbed the back of his neck, his expression sheepish. "I gotta say, I'm feeling a bit outclassed here," he admitted. "I should have trained harder." "You think?" Raditz muttered under his breath. "Quiet," Piccolo ordered, his sharp gaze snapping to the sky. "It's landing." All heads turned toward the horizon as a massive flying saucer descended through the clouds. The air grew heavy with malevolence as the ship settled onto the ground with a low, mechanical hum. The ship's hatch opened slowly, steam hissing as the ramp lowered. From the shadows within, two figures emerged. The first was a familiar sight, though not one anyone had hoped to see again. A white alien with purple accents on his elbows, knees, and head stepped forward, his mechanical tail swishing behind him. His chest bore a metallic plate, covering what had once been a grievous wound. "Frieza," Bardock whispered, his fists clenching. But the second figure made even Frieza look small. The towering being stood nearly 8 feet tall, his armor a gleaming reminder of the Planet Trade Organization's grip on the galaxy. Two massive bull-like horns jutted from the sides of his head, and his purple skin was streaked with pink along his neck, arms, and legs. "King Cold," Piccolo muttered, his voice low and full of unease. The two aliens surveyed the area, their expressions a mix of disdain and cruel amusement. King Cold was the first to speak, his voice smooth and arrogant. "I still don't see why we didn't just destroy this planet from orbit," he said, glancing at Frieza. "I told you, father," Frieza sneered, his sharp voice dripping with venom. "I want my revenge on that insolent Saiyan who dared wound me so grievously. I'll leave this miserable planet in ruins, and when he returns, I'll personally see to his demise." King Cold raised an eyebrow, his towering frame exuding calm disdain. "If you can, that is," he said, his deep voice filled with cold amusement. "The last encounter didn't exactly go in your favor, did it?" He seemed to leave quite the impression on your pride and your body. Frieza's tail flicked angrily, the mechanical replacement clinking faintly. "I was caught off guard," he spat, his lips curling into a snarl. From their vantage point, Bardock clenched his fist, his knuckles turning white. "It's him," he said through gritted teeth. "It's Frieza. I thought my dad finished him off." "I guess he survived somehow," Raditz replied grimly, narrowing his eyes as he scanned the alien's mechanical enhancements. "Looks like he's had some upgrades after the beating Kakarot gave him." Nappa cracked his knuckles, the sound like distant thunder. "Let's make sure we finish the job this time," he said, a dangerous grin spreading across his face. "Where are these Earthlings?" King Cold drawled, his tone laced with boredom. His golden eyes scanned the horizon lazily, as if he were waiting for a servant to bring him tea. "I was under the impression they would sense our arrival and come groveling by now." "Patience, father," Frieza said, his smirk revealing razor-sharp teeth. "They'll come soon enough, and if they don't, I'll just have to speed up the process by tearing this planet apart piece by piece. That always gets their attention." King Cold shook his head disapprovingly. "So uncivilized," he muttered. Just as Frieza opened his mouth to reply, a lone figure descended from the cliffs above, his silhouette sharp against the bright sky. The air grew heavy as he floated down, landing gracefully in the clearing. "Frieza," Raditz said, his voice cold and steady as he stepped forward. "I see you're still alive." Frieza's eyes widened briefly, before his lips curled into a cruel smile. "Well, well," he said mockingly. "If it isn't one of my runaway pets, I thought I'd lost you." Raditz's expression didn't waver. "We're not your pets anymore, Frieza," he said, his voice laced with defiance. "Kakarot defeated you once, and he'll do it again if he has to." Frieza chuckled darkly, the sound reverberating through the air. "Now that's amusing," he said. "But I'm afraid your dear brother isn't here to save you. He only left planet Yardred a few days ago. And from my calculations, he won't return for several hours. That's more than enough time for me to turn this planet into an empty wasteland. A nice welcoming gift for him, wouldn't you say?" "You'll have to get through me first," Raditz growled. His aura flared suddenly, a vibrant crimson that surged around him like a blazing inferno. The ground trembled beneath his feet as his power climbed higher and higher. Raditz clenched his fist, feeling his muscles strain under the intense pressure of the Kaioken technique. He had pushed it to X25, knowing full well that it wouldn't be enough to defeat Frieza. But he also knew his limit, and that overextending himself could destroy his body. "Kakarot, you'd better get here soon," Raditz thought, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't know how long I can hold him off." Bardock gritted his teeth as he watched Raditz square off against Frieza. His fingers twitched with the urge to join the fight. "Why are we just sitting here?" he hit. "Raditz can't take him alone. He's going to need our help." "If we jump in now," Nappa said, his voice low but firm, "we'll lose our best advantage. Frieza doesn't know we're here. If we keep our power suppressed, we might actually catch him off guard. For now, hold your position." Bardock's tail flicked behind him restlessly, but he begrudgingly nodded, keeping his power low as they waited for the right moment. "Get him, men!" Frieza barked, his voice sharp and commanding. At his signal, hundreds of soldiers poured out from the ship, a chaotic swarm of various alien species, each armed to the teeth. They charged toward Raditz, their battle cries filling the air. Raditz didn't flinch. The first warrior lunged at him with a jagged blade, but Raditz caught the blade mid-swing with his bare hand. He drove his other fist through the soldier's chest, sending the lifeless body flying backward. A second attacker met an even swifter end, as Raditz unleashed a small, precise energy blast, obliterating the soldier in an instant. One by one, the warriors fell, their numbers thinning rapidly as Raditz moved like a whirlwind of destruction. Within seconds, the battlefield was silent again, the ground littered with smoking craters and lifeless bodies. Raditz lowered his hands, his chest heaving as his aura flared around him. He locked eyes with Frieza, his expression unyielding. "Impressive," King Cold said, his tone dripping with false admiration. "Now I can see why my son had so much trouble with you pesky Saiyans." Raditz didn't look away from Frieza. "Did you really think your men would stand a chance against me?" he asked, his voice steady but sharp. "Of course not," Frieza replied with a wicked grin. but they're expendable, and, well, I do enjoy watching a good fight now and then. It's entertaining. Shall we get to it then? King Cold's voice cut through the tense air like a blade. He tapped his fingers impatiently against his arm. I must say, I'm starting to grow a bit bored with all this posturing. Frieza glanced at his father, a smirk creeping across his lips. Oh, don't worry, father. I'm getting to it, he said with a dramatic flair, his voice laced with amusement. I do enjoy a bit of theater, after all. Raditz floated closer, his crimson aura flaring faintly around him. He crossed his arms and smirked. I'll tell you what, Frieza, he said, his voice calm but full of challenge. I'll give you a free shot. One chance. Let's see what you've got. Frieza's eyes widened slightly before narrowing into gleaming slits. Oh, how generous of you, he sneered. But don't think you're in any position to be offering such deals. Still, he raised a finger, his smirk growing wider. I'll humor you. Just don't dodge. Otherwise, this little attack of mine might accidentally wipe out your precious planet, and wouldn't that be a shame? As he spoke, a small orb of energy began to form at the tip of his finger, crackling and pulsing with destructive force. The orb rapidly expanded, growing to the size of a basketball, its glow casting ominous shadows across the ground. Raditz held his ground, watching the tyrant's every move. But before Frieza could unleash his attack, a sharp, spinning blade of energy whizzed through the air with deadly precision. The Destructo Disc struck Frieza from behind, slicing cleanly through his neck. His head separated from his body in an instant, both pieces falling unceremoniously to the ground. Krillin hovered in the air behind him, his red aura blazing like wildfire as the remains of the attack fizzled out in the air. Nice assist, Raditz said, nodding appreciatively as he floated over to Frieza's lifeless body. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and unleashed a quick but powerful burst of energy. The blast incinerated what was left of the Tyrant, leaving no trace behind. That's the end of him, Raditz said firmly. He won't be coming back this time. Krillin let his aura fade, his body trembling slightly as he caught his breath. Holding the Kaioken at X-35 had pushed him to his limit, but the payoff was undeniable. A small, exhausted smile spread across his face. At least the training wasn't for nothing, he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Raditz turned his gaze to King Cold, his expression hardening. Your turn, he said coldly, pointing at the towering figure. You'll be joining your son in the other world soon enough. King Cold raised an eyebrow, his amusement evident. Oh, will I now? He asked, his voice calm but filled with menace. His body erupted with an intense aura of energy, causing the ground beneath him to crack and tremble. I must admit, I'm rather impressed by your confidence, but it's misplaced. Cracks began forming all over King Cold's body, and radiant light escaped from the fractures. The fragments of his outer form shattered and flew in all directions, leaving the air heavy with shockwaves. When the light finally faded, King Cold stood transformed. His towering frame was leaner, but far more menacing, his blue skin shimmering with streaks of dark blue along his knees, elbows, and the crown of his now bald head. He looked eerily similar to Frieza's fourth form, but his aura radiated an even greater sense of terror. I can achieve my full power in an instant, King Cold said with a cruel laugh. Allow me to demonstrate. Raditz stared, frozen in disbelief. The sheer energy radiating from King Cold was overwhelming, unlike anything he had ever felt before. His hands trembled at his sides. He had faced Frieza with confidence, knowing he could push his Kaioken further if needed. But this was something entirely different. Now, King Cold said, raising both hands as a colossal ball of energy formed between them. Let's play a little game. I'll make it easy for you. It's the same one you played with my son. If you drop the ball, he paused, smirking as the massive sphere of energy crackled ominously. The planet goes up in flames. Krillin's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the immense energy gather in King Cold's hand. His body screamed in protest, the strain from the previous battle still weighing on him. But he clenched his fists and let out a determined breath. I can't just stand here, he muttered. His red aura flared to life again, crackling with intensity as he summoned another Destructo Disc. The spinning blade of energy hummed in his hand, sharp and deadly. He raised the attack, preparing to strike, but before he could release it, King Cold's piercing eyes locked onto him. The tyrant smirked, and in a flash, fired a powerful blast in Krillin's direction. The monk barely had time to react. He dropped the Destructo Disc and crossed his arms in front of his chest, bracing himself as the blast collided with him. The impact sent him hurtling backward, smoke and debris trailing behind him. King Cold chuckled, his voice dripping with malice. "Did you really think that little trick would work twice?" he taunted, turning his attention back to Raditz. Raditz's body tensed as King Cold hurled the massive ball of energy directly at him. The blazing sphere hurtled downward, its intense heat distorting the air as it descended like